public media. We did see President Trump issue this executive order directing that federal funding should be cut for NPR and PBS. He's alleging bias in the reporting. And it is, as we've seen, the latest move by the president to use executive power and the leaves of government to target institutions, media, cultural, academic.
And our people report straight down the line. And I think that not only do they do that, they do so with a mission that very few other broadcast organizations have, which is a requirement to serve the entire public.
If you think PBS is biased, compared to who? Name one news organization in America, and I shouldn't be defending us, I get paid by PBS, but I'm going to do it.
What do we make of this?
I brought props with you
I
today,
love a
Dana.
prop.
I went ahead and read the entire law for you, the 1967 Public Broadcasting Act. There is nothing in this law that gives any president the ability to strip away the funding for PBS and NPR. Congress was really specific back 50 plus years ago. They wanted to create an entity that was free of government control. They wanted to make sure no president could ever pressure PBS or NPR. So this is going to be a legal fight, like so many others that we've seen. And I suspect President Trump probably wants it that way.
He definitely does.
Look at the statement that we've received this morning from the head of PBS, Paula Kruger. She says this is a blatantly unlawful move overnight by President Trump. She says this is going to hurt people around the country because it threatens our ability to serve the American public with educational programming. The lie at the end is key. We are currently exploring all options to allow PBS to continue. NPR is saying the exact same thing. Now, we know that President Trump was already planning on sending a rescission package to Congress, trying to claw back the next 2 years of funding for PBS and NPR. That's already in the works. It seems to me he wants to have a fight very publicly with these networks, and he may well get one.
Yeah, no, that's 100% what this is.
Boy. So we got to talk about President Trump signing a sweeping executive order to cut off taxpayer funding for NPR and PBS. Okay, now this is something that has been on the agenda for conservatives for a long time, right? It's kind of amazing how they haven't done anything about this up until now. Because President Trump, again, seems to be leading the Republicans to actually do the things that they promised, which we really don't get too much of from Republicans, right? But that has changed under President Trump, the first president in my lifetime to actually do the things that he claimed that he was going to do, right? The promises that he made, he's actually trying to do these things. And that freaks people out because people aren't used to the president actually trying to do the things that they promised, right? So with that being said, I really like what President Trump is doing here when it comes to NPR and PBS, because ultimately he is defunding state propaganda, right? And it is not state propaganda that is in his favor. It's actually in favor of the Democrat Party, right? They are an arm of the Democrat Party. They're a mouthpiece for the Democrat Party. Everybody knows they're extremely liberal. And I personally agree with the president when it comes to his reasoning behind cutting off the funding for these media outlets. So let's read here. President Trump signed an executive order late Thursday terminating federal funding for National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service, NPR and PBS, which have long been targeted for cuts by conservatives. Both receive partial funding through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which the president argued is unnecessary in the current media environment. Quote, government funding of news media in this environment is not only outdated and unnecessary, but corrosive to the appearance of journalistic independence, Trump wrote in the order. Yeah, so here's the thing about this, okay? I personally believe that if you are going to have a media outlet that is funded by the government, that they have to be nonpartisan, right, and unbiased. It has to be just straight news, right? Like, for example, Straight Arrow News, right? Straight Arrow News, they tend to be the news outlet that I think is the most straight down the middle when it comes to here are the facts, and that's it, right? We're not going to give you spin. We're just giving you the facts. We're telling you what happened, and that's it, right? But that's not PBS. That's not NPR. We're going to get into it, but these outlets, again, clearly are biased. And if you're going to have a government-funded outlet, media outlet, to educate the public about what's going on, it should not be in favor of one party. The CPB board shall cease direct funding to NPR and PBS, consistent with my administration's policy to ensure that federal funding does not support bias and partisan news coverage, he added. The CPB board shall cancel existing direct funding to the maximum extent allowed by law and shall decline to provide future funding. Trump further directed the CPB to end indirect funding to NPR and PBS, including by, quote, ensuring that licensees and permittees of public radio and television stations, as well as other recipients of CPB funds, do not use federal funds for NPR and PBS. Yeah. So the CPB is set to receive $535 million in congressionally appropriated funds annually to distribute to public broadcasters in 2025 and 2026. PBS and its member stations receive about 15% of their revenues from CPB, while NPR stations get 10% of their funds from the corporation, according to NPR. NPR itself only receives 1% directly from the CPB. Yeah, so regardless, these platforms should be defunded, and that's what President Trump is doing. And of course, they have a problem with it, right? They're upset because outlets like NPR and PBS claim that they're not biased, even though it is clearly obvious that they're very biased.
The big obstacle to that is allowing all these immigrants in, 7 billion immigrants in 3 years illegally.
It's actually not 7 million who've been allowed to enter. That's the number of encounters over the last 3 years. It's actually lower than that.
All of them are allowed to enter. They are coming right through. I've been down there. I watched over 2 hours that I spent there just between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning. I watched 300 people coming through. Everybody is allowed through. Nobody's turned away.
Mr. Kennedy, I've also spent a lot of time on the border. 7 million is an inaccurate figure. It's closer to 6 million encounters over the last 3 years, and that includes people who were subject to Title 42 expulsions, meaning they were not allowed to enter.
And how many of those, what percentage of those people were turned back?
I don't have an exact figure, sir, but the 7 million you're saying is inaccurate.
There's also 1.5 million who have come over that are runaways.
So back to my question.
The number is approximately 7 million have come across and are here today in this country.
It is not 7 million over the last 3 years. That's just inaccurate.
General from 27 states now calling on the White House to make changes to its border policies. The coalition demanding an end to catch and release, which allows DHS to release illegal migrants into the country. More than 7 million migrants have illegally entered the U.S. so far under the Biden administration.
Well, what about the 7 million people that have come across the southern border and then released into the interior of the United States?
When you look at a lot of numbers, 7.2 million have crossed the border under the Biden presidency.
Let's talk about the newsroom. You have 87 registered Democrats, not a single Republican in your editor board. So, I mean, how does that work to give us the perception that you're doing your job of actually delivering unbiased information?
Well, I would agree with you that that number is a concern if it is accurate. I do believe that we need to have journalists who represent the full breadth of the American society so that we can report well for all Americans.
Well, I think that you are failing. I realize you've only been there for a year, but I just really think that while it is a small portion of your budget, you very much should expect to restructure your revenue streams, because I don't think that NPR is necessarily worth saving.
Former senior business editor for NPR.
How long do you work at NPR?
I believe he was there just over 25 years.
25 years? Award-winning journalist? Did he win any awards?
Our time to
Peabody Award, that's pretty important, isn't it?
That is, absolutely.
So pretty distinguished journalist, right?
Certainly.
And he wrote a long story about what you do at NPR. Is NPR biased?
Congressman, I have never seen any instance of political bias determining editorial decisions. No.
Well, Mr. Berliner, in his story last year, wrote, in the D.C. area, editorial positions at NPR, he said he found 87 registered Democrats, 0 Republicans. Is that accurate?
We do not track the numbers or the voter registration, but I find that
was award-winning journalist who worked 25 years at NPR, Mr. Berliner, was he lying when he wrote that?
I am not presuming such. I just we don't track that information about our journalists.
87 to 0, and you're not biased?
I think that is concerning if those numbers are accurate.
It's concerning. I mean, it wasn't 44-43, it wasn't 60-27, it wasn't 70-17, it wasn't even 80-7. It was 87 Democrats, 0 Republicans, and you say NPR is not biased.
Would it trouble you to hear that for 6 months there was an analysis done on PBS's NewsHour from June to November of 2023, where they found that far right that term was used 162 times and far left was only used 6 times? Do you find that troubling?
I don't know the study that you're referring to.
The Research Center did a 6-month analysis.
Yeah, so clearly, as you guys can see there, the CEOs of PBS and NPR, they don't like being confronted with facts that their outlets are indeed biased, right? They are liberal propaganda, okay? And the liberal propagandists don't like the reality that they're being called out for their propaganda. This is why they're now boohoo whining and crying about President Trump defunding PBS and NPR. Take a look.
The president tweeted or socialed or truthed, Republicans must defund and totally disassociate themselves from NPR and PBS, the radical left monsters that so badly hurt our country. I have to tell you, I heard monsters and I thought of Cookie Monster. I thought of
did too,
Sesame
actually.
Street, and I thought of that children's programming.
Right.
That is in many ways what people think of when they think of PBS.
Absolutely.
Is that impacted too?
Absolutely. And out of this executive order, we believe it impacts our funding out of the Department of Education.
Right now, I mean, do you have the money to keep functioning?
Well, we have programming, so you're not going to turn on your TV set and not see our children's programming anymore.
Okay.
But if that funding is cut off, we have programs in development right now, and that will suddenly skid to a halt.
At its core, the Trump administration is based on one theme, which is they think progressive elites have destroyed the country. We need to take progressive elites down. And that's whether they're in museums, in sciences, in the universities, whatever. And so, in some sense, they have some case to be made that the elites have become a little more progressive. But as they go after CPB, I'm reminded of the call I got 23 years ago from Jim Lehrer offering me this job. And I'm sitting there, of course, in a Little League dugout. And Jim said, you're going to be on the show on Fridays. We want you to go out and do a lot of reporting. You got to bring something to the game. This is about journalism. And I would say, if you think PBS is biased, compared to who? Name one news organization in America, and I shouldn't be defending us, I get paid by PBS, but I'm going to do it, who's more straight down the line than we are. Is it MSNBC? Is it Fox? Is it CNN? Lisa Desjardins? Like one of the great journalists of our time? And so, you know, I will defend PBS, A, because I know how good we do in relative terms, but B, because we travel around the country when we see the local affiliates where they're not doing some ideological thing. They are the voice of their community. And so that's one of the reasons I'm violating my normal principle of never defending somebody I work for and trying to say, this is how I was hired to be a journalist.
Jonathan, what do you make of the president's moves at this time? Not just about PBS. This is not just about us. It's part of a larger campaign here.
Right. And I was going to say, well, what can I say after that passionate defense of PBS and CPB? But I think what the president is doing, you know, it is a fundamental attack on our Constitution, on the foundation of this country. People need to understand and remember, there is only one profession that is protected in the Constitution, and it is the free press. It is the press. And why? Because the founders understood that the survival of a democracy depends on an informed citizenry. And the citizenry can only be informed by a press that can report and report on the affairs of the republic free and unfettered. And whether they are, come from the left or from the right, the government should not interfere with that reporting. And so when you have a president of the United States who is making it his mission to attack the free press, we should all be concerned whether we are at PBS or whether we are at MSNBC, because he's focused on us too.
Well, I know we'll all continue to do our work without fear or favor. David Brooks, Jonathan K.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that, okay? This is an attack on the Constitution, according to PBS's and MSNBC's Jonathan Sweetheart, right? Who is exaggerating, because anytime you disagree with the Democrats is an attack on the Constitution. That in and of itself, the fact that he said that on the network just shows you how far left the network is, right? Anybody that believes that PBS or NPR, that they are straight down the middle, you're far left. You can only believe that if you are a far leftist, right? The fact that these people are saying that they're straight down the middle with a straight face shows you the bias, right? That in and of itself shows bias, because anybody that is actually not super far left or that's not biased can see that NPR and PBS are clearly biased in favor of the Democrat Party and the left, right? Everybody can see that, but they can't see it. Okay, they can't see it, which again is evidence of the bias, right? I'm just saying, in my opinion, because you would have to be a far leftist in order to not see it. But again, these people don't think it's a problem when 90% of their workforce are liberal, right? That's not a problem, right? Oh, we don't let our political ideology get in the way of our coverage, when that clearly is what they do, right? That's what happened with Hunter Biden. Chuck Todd already admitted that, yeah, there were some people in the media who thought that, hey, if I actually tried to investigate the smoke coming from the White House that Joe Biden is mentally declining, then we may be helping Trump win, right? This is why they didn't want to cover it. They didn't want to cover it because they thought it was good for Trump and bad for Democrats. Same thing when it comes to the Hunter Biden laptop story. That story turned out to be true, but the mainstream liberal media said it was Russian disinformation. They dismissed it because it made the Democrats look bad and it was good for Trump. But you're trying to tell me that these outlets that, you know, are basically 90% liberal when it comes to their workforce, oh, they don't have any ideological bias, they're just calling things straight down the middle? Get out of here. Nobody believes that, right? No serious person actually believes that. And there's nowhere in the Constitution that requires that the government fund a media outlet, right? The government does not have to fund, quote unquote, journalism, especially if the journalism is nothing but propaganda on behalf of the Democrat Party, right? The government doesn't have to fund that. The government can't lock you up in jail for the things that you say, for the journalism that you do. That is the point of the First Amendment. The point of the First Amendment is not to protect the funding of NPR and CBS, right? That's not the point of the First Amendment, right? That's not in the Constitution. But again, if you listen to Jonathan Sweetcheeks, this is an attack on the Constitution. Not funding liberal media propaganda is an attack on journalism. It's an attack on the free press. Well, if you're truly the free press, then why do you need government funding, right? The free press should not have government funding, right? Because a press that's funded by the government ain't really free, right? It's not really free, to be honest with you. So, you know, it's just funny to listen to these people always try to exaggerate, to claim that Trump is attacking the Constitution anytime that President Trump does anything that these people disagree with. Anything, right? In their ideal world, President Trump will have no power whatsoever, and we would be ruled by woke activist judges, right? That's what they want. In fact, that's what's happening right now. I wouldn't be surprised if some woke activist judge tries to stop the defunding of PBS and NPR, right? Some judge said, no, you can't do this, right? Which is what they've been doing since President Trump got in office, basically trying to stop everything that he's tried to do as president of the United States, which is the real constitutional crisis. That is the real attack on the Constitution that the mainstream liberal media refuses to cover fairly, right? The fact that these judges are going out of their way to basically overthrow the executive branch. Okay, that is what the so-called journalists should be focused on, but they're not focused on it because they're propagandists. They're not journalists, and they want state-funded propaganda, and President Trump is taking that away from them, and now they're pissed off and they're upset. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.